I'll stay, I said quietly, fighting my heart, and knowing it was a mistake, if you tell me you love me. She closed her mouth, and pressed her lips together so tightly that they formed a white scar. Slowly, cell by cell, it seemed, her body drew back into itself all that she'd given to me a few moments before. Why are you doing this? She asked. I didn't know why. Maybe it was the cold turkey, what I'd been through in the last months, and the new life I felt I'd won. Maybe it was death. Prabaker's death, and Abdullah's, and the death I secretly feared was waiting for me in Afghanistan. Whatever the reason, it was stupid and pointless and even cruel, and I couldn't stop wanting it. If you say that you love me, I said again. I don't, she murmured, at last. I tried to stop her, with my fingertips on her mouth, but she turned her head to face me, and her voice was clearer and strong. I don't. I can't. I won't. When Nazir returned from the beach, coughing and clearing his voice loudly to announce his arrival, we were already showered and dressed. He smiled, such a rare thing, that smile, as he looked from me, to her, and back again. But the cold sorrow in our eyes drove the downward curves of his face into willow wreaths of disappointment, and he looked away. We watched her leave in a taxi on that long and lonely night before we went to Cater's War, and when Nazir finally met my eyes he nodded, slowly and solemnly. I held the stare for a few moments, but then it was my turn to look away. I didn't want to face the strange mix of grief and elation I'd seen in his eyes because I knew what it was telling me. Carla was gone, yes, but it was the whole world of love and beauty that we'd lost that night. As soldiers in Cater's cause we had to leave it all behind. And the other world, the once unlimited world of what we might yet be, was shrinking, hour by hour, to a bullet's blood-red full stop. Chapter 31. Nazir woke me before dawn, and we left the house as the first yawning rays of light stretched into the fading night. When we climbed from our taxi at the airport we saw Qadrbai and Khalid Ansari near the entrance to the domestic terminal, but we didn't acknowledge them. Cater had laid out a complex itinerary that would take us, with 4 major changes of transport, from Bombay to Quetta, in Pakistan, near the Afghan border. His instructions were that we should appear at all times to be individual travelers, and that the travelers shouldn't acknowledge one another in any way. We were setting out with him to commit a score of crimes across 3 international boundaries, and to interfere in a war between Afghanistan's Mujahideen freedom fighters and the mighty Goliath of the Soviet Union. He was planning to succeed in his mission, but he was also allowing for failure. He was ensuring that if any of us were killed or captured at any stage, the trail of connections back to Bombay would be as cold as a mountain climber's axe. It was a long journey, and it began as a silent one. Nazir, scrupulous as ever in his conformity with Qadrbai's instructions, never uttered a single word on the first leg from Bombay to Karachi. An hour after we'd checked into our separate rooms in the Chandni Hotel, however, I heard a soft tap on the door. Before the door was halfway open he slipped inside and pressed it shut behind him. His eyes were wide with nervous excitement and his manner was agitated, almost frantic. I was unsettled and a little disgusted by the conspicuousness of his fear, and I reached out to put a hand on his shoulder. Take it easy, Nazir. You're freaking me out, brother, with all this cloak and dagger shit. He saw the condescension behind my smile, even if he didn't understand the full meaning of the words. His jaw locked around some inscrutable resolve, and he frowned at me fiercely. We'd become friends, Nazir and I. He'd opened his heart to me. But friendship, for him, was measured by what men do and endure for one another, not by what they share and enjoy. It puzzled and even tormented him that I almost always met his earnest gravity with facetiousness and triviality. The irony was that we were, in fact, similarly dour and serious men, but his grim severity was so stark that it roused me from my own solemnity, and provoked a childish, prankish desire to mock him. Russian, everywhere, he said, speaking quietly, but with a hard, breathy intensity. Russian, know everything, know every man, pay money for know everything. Russian spies? I asked. In Karachi? Everywhere Pakistan, he nodded, turning his head aside to spit on the floor. I wasn't sure if the gesture was in contempt or for luck. Too much danger. Not speak anyone. You go. Faluda House. Bori Bazaar. Today. Saad Char Baj. 4:30, I repeated. You want me to meet someone at the Faluda House, in the Bori Bazaar, at 4:30? Is that it? "Who do you want me to meet?" He allowed me a grim little smile and then opened the door. Glancing briefly along the corridor, he slipped out again as swiftly and silently as he'd entered. I looked at my watch. 1 o'clock. I had 3 hours to kill. For my passport smuggling missions, Abdul Ghani had given me a money belt that was his uniquely original design. The belt was made from a tough, waterproof vinyl and was several times wider than the standard money belt. Worn flat against the stomach, the belt could hold up to 10 passports and a quantity of cash. On that first day in Karachi, it held 4 of my own books. The first of them was the British book that I'd used to purchase plane and train tickets and register at the hotel. The second book was the clean American passport that Qadarbhai required me to use for the mission into Afghanistan. The 2 others, a Swiss book and a Canadian book, were spares for emergency use. There was also a $10,000 contingency fund, paid in advance, as part of my fee for accepting the hazardous mission. I wrapped the thick belt around my waist, beneath my shirt, slipped my switchblade into the scabbard at the back of my trousers, and left the hotel to explore the city. It was hot, hotter than usual for the mild month of November, and a light, unseasonable rain had left the streets hazy with a thickened, steamy air. Karachi was a tense and dangerous city then. For several years the military junta that had seized power in Pakistan and executed the democratically elected Prime Minister, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, had ruled the nation by dividing it. They'd exploited genuine grievances between ethnic and religious communities by inciting violent conflicts. They'd pitted the indigenous ethnic groups, particularly the Sindhis, the Pashtuns, and the Punjabis, against the immigrants, known as Mohajirs, who'd streamed into the newly founded nation of Pakistan when it was partitioned from India. The army secretly supported extremists from the rival groups with weapons, money, and the judicious application of favors. When the riots that they'd provoked and fomented finally erupted, the generals ordered their police to open fire. Rage against the police violence was then contained by the deployment of army troops. In that way the army, whose covert operations had created the bloody conflicts, were seen to be the only force capable of preserving order and the rule of law. As massacres and revenge killings tumbled over one another with escalating brutishness, kidnappings and torture became routine events. Fanatics from one group seized supporters from another group, and inflicted sadistic torments on them. Many of those who were abducted died in that fearsome captivity. Some vanished, and their bodies were never found. And when one group or another became powerful enough to threaten the balance of the deadly game, the generals incited violent conflict within their group to weaken it. The fanatics then began to feed on themselves, killing and maiming rivals from their own ethnic communities. Each new cycle of violence and vengeance ensured, of course, that no matter what form of government emerged or dissolved in the nation, only the army would grow stronger, and only the army could exercise real power. Despite that dramatic tension, and because of it, Karachi was a good place to do business. The generals, who were like a mafia clan without the courage, style, or solidarity of genuine, self-respecting gangsters, had seized the country by force, held the entire nation hostage at the points of many guns, and looted the treasury. They lost no time in assuring the great powers, and the other arms-producing nations, that Pakistan's armed forces were open for their business. The civilized nations responded with enthusiasm, and for years Karachi was host to junketing parties of arms dealers from America, Britain, China, Sweden, Italy, and other countries. No less industrious in their pursuit of a deal with the camarilla of generals were the illegals, the black marketeers, gunrunners, freebooters, and mercenaries. They crowded into the cafes and hotels, foreigners from 50 countries who had crime in mind and adventure in their hearts. In a sense, I was one of them, a ravager like the rest of them, profiting from the war in Afghanistan like the rest of them, but I wasn't comfortable in their company. For 3 hours I drifted from a restaurant to a hotel to a chai shop, sitting near or with groups of foreigners who were searching for a quick buck. Their conversations were dispiritingly calculating. The war in Afghanistan, most of them conjectured cheerily, had a few good years left in it. The generals were, it had to be admitted, under considerable pressure. There were rumors that Benazir, daughter of the executed Prime Minister, was planning to return to Pakistan from exile in London to lead the Democratic Alliance opposed to the junta. But with a little luck and skillful connivance, the profiteers hoped, the army might remain in control of the country, and the well-established channels of corruption, for some years yet. The talk was of cash crops, a euphemism for contraband and black market trade goods, which were in great demand along the entire border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Cigarettes, particularly American blends, were selling at Khyber Pass for 16 times their already inflated Karachi price. Medicines of every kind were generating profits that increased in scale from month to month. Winter clothing, suitable for snow habitats, was exceptionally marketable. One enterprising German freebooter had driven a Mercedes truck loaded with surplus German Army Alpine issue uniforms, complete with thermal underwear, from Munich to Peshawar. He'd sold the lot, including the truck, for 5 times its purchase value. The buyer was an Afghan warlord who was favored by Western powers and agencies, including the American CIA. The heavy winter clothing, after a journey of thousands of kilometers through Germany, Austria, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, Iran, and Pakistan, never reached the fighting men of the Mujahedin in the snow-draped mountains of Afghanistan. Instead, the winter uniforms and underwear were stored in one of the warlord's warehouses in Peshawar, awaiting the end of the war. The renegade and his small army were sitting out the war in the safety of their fortress compounds in Pakistan. His plan was to launch a strike for power with his own troops after the real fighting against the Russians was done, and the war was won. News of that new market, a warlord, cashed up with CIA money and hungry for supplies at any price, sent thrilling, speculative ripples through the community of foreign opportunists in Karachi. I encountered the story of the venturesome German and his truck full of Alpine uniforms in 3 slightly different incarnations during the course of the afternoon. In a fever, something like gold fever, the foreigners passed the story among themselves as they pursued and closed down deals for shipments of canned foods, bales of brushed fleeces, shipping containers of engine parts, a warehouse full of second-hand spirit stoves, and stocks of every kind of weapon from bayonets to grenade launchers. And everywhere, in every conversation, I heard the dark, desperate incantation: if the war goes on for another year, we'll have it made. Vexed and gloomy with squalling emotions, I entered the Faluda house in the Bori Bazaar, and ordered one of the sweet, technicolored drinks. The Faluda was an indecently sweet concoction of white noodles, milk, rose flavors, and other mellifluous syrups. The Fernie house in Bombay's Dongri area, near Qadarbai's house, was justly famous for its delicious Faluda drinks, but they were insipid when compared to the fabulous confections served at Karachi's Faluda house. When the tall glass of pink, red, and white sugary milk appeared beside my right hand, I looked up to thank the waiter and saw that it was Khalid Ansari, carrying 2 drinks. "You look like you need something stronger than this, man," he said with a smile, a small, sad smile, as he sat down beside me. "What's up, or what's down, for that matter?" "It's nothing," I sighed, offering him a smile in return. "Come on," he insisted. "Let's have it." I looked into his honest, open, scarred face, and it occurred to me that Khalid knew me better than I knew him. Would I have noticed and realized how troubled he was, I wondered, if our roles were reversed, and he'd entered the Faluda house with such disturbing preoccupations? Probably not. Khalid was so often gloomy that I wouldn't have given it a second thought. "Well, it's just a bit of soul-searching, I guess. I've been doing some research, digging around in some of the chaikhanas and restaurants you told me about, some of the places where the black market guys and the mercenaries hang out. It was pretty depressing. There's a lot of people here who want the war to go on forever, and they don't give a shit who's getting killed or who's doing the killing. They're making money," he shrugged. "It's not their war. I don't expect them to care. That's just how it is. I know. It's not the money thing," I frowned, searching for the words, rather than the emotion that had prompted them. "It's just, if you wanted a definition of sick, really sick-minded, you could do worse than somebody who wants a war. Any war. To go on longer. And, you feel, kind of tainted, kind of like them?" Khalid asked gently, looking down into his glass. "Maybe I do. I don't know. I wouldn't even think about it, if I heard people talking like that somewhere else. It wouldn't bug me if I wasn't here, and if I wasn't doing exactly the same thing myself. It isn't exactly the same. It is. Pretty much. Cater's paying me, so I'm making money out of it, like them, and I'm smuggling new shit into a shit fight, just like they are. And maybe you're starting to ask yourself what the fuck you're doing here. That, too. Would you believe me if I told you I haven't got a clue? I really, honestly, don't know why the fuck I'm doing it. Cater asked me to be his American, and I'm doing it. But I don't know why. We were silent for a while, sipping at our drinks and listening to the clatter and buzz surrounding us in the busy Faluda house. A large portable radio was playing romantic ghazals in Urdu. I could hear conversations in 3 or 4 languages from customers close to us. I couldn't understand the words, nor could I even identify which languages they were. Baluchi, Uzbek, Tajik, Farsi. This is great, Khalid said, using a long spoon to scoop noodles into his mouth from the glass. It's too sweet for my taste, I answered him, drinking the treat nonetheless. Some things should be too sweet, he replied, giving me a wink as he sucked on the straw. If Faludas weren't too sweet, we wouldn't drink them. We finished our drinks and walked out into the late afternoon sunlight, pausing beyond the doorway to light our cigarettes. We'll take off in different directions, Khalid muttered as he held a match for my cigarette in his cupped hands. Just keep walking that way, south, for a few minutes. I'll catch you up. Don't say goodbye. He turned on his heel and walked away, stepping out to the edge of the road and into the fast lane of foot traffic between the footpath and the cars. I turned and walked off in the opposite direction. Some minutes later, at the perimeter of the bazaar, a taxi slid to a stop quickly beside me. The back door opened and I jumped in next to Khalid. Another man was in the front seat beside the driver. He was in his early 30s, with short, dark brown hair receding from a high, wide forehead. His deep-set eyes were of a brown so dark as to seem black until direct sunlight pierced the irises to reveal the auburn earth tones swirling within them. His eyes stared evenly, intelligently, from beneath black brows that all but met in the center. His nose was straight, descending to a short upper lip, a firm determined mouth, and a blunt, rounded chin. It was obvious that the man had shaved that day, and probably not long ago, but a blue-black shadow darkened the lower half of his face along the neat, sharply defined lines that governed his beard. It was a strong, square, symmetrical face, handsome in its strength and even proportions if not in any one outstanding feature. This is Ahmed Zadeh, Khalid announced as the cab moved off. Ahmed, this is Lynn. We shook hands, sizing one another up with equal candor and affability. His strong face might have seemed severe but for a peculiar expression that screwed his eyes into a gentle squint, and creased the crests of his cheeks with smile lines. Whenever he was concentrating, whenever he wasn't completely relaxed, Ahmed Zadeh wore an expression that made him look as if he was searching for a friend in a crowd of strangers. It was a disarming expression, and it endeared him to me at once. I've heard a lot about you, he said, releasing my hand and resting his arm on the front seat of the taxi. His accent, speaking a hesitant but clear English, was that melodious North African blend of French and Arabic. I hope it wasn't all good, I said, laughing. Would you prefer people to say bad things about you? I don't know. My friend Didier says that praising people behind their back is monstrously unfair, because the one thing you can't defend yourself against is the good that people say about you. D'accord, Ahmed laughed. Exactly so. Shit, that reminds me, Khalid interjected, fishing through his pockets until he found a folded envelope. I almost forgot. I saw Didier, the night before we left. He was looking for you. I couldn't tell him where you were, so he asked me to give you this letter. I took the folded envelope and slipped it into the pocket of my shirt, to read when I was alone. Thanks, I muttered. So what's going on? Where are we going? To a mosque, Khalid replied, with that small, sad smile. We're going to pick up a friend first, then we're going to meet Cater and some of the other guys who'll be going with us across the border. How many guys? There'll be 30 or so, I think, once we're all together. Most of them are already in Kedah, or at Chaman, near the border. We leave tomorrow. You, me, Qadarbai, Nazir, Ahmed, and one other guy, Mahmoud. He's a friend of mine. I don't think you know him. You'll meet him in a few minutes. We are the small United Nations, non? Ahmed asked rhetorically. Abdul Qadir Khan from Afghanistan, Khalid from Palestine, Mahmoud from Iran, you from New Zealand. I'm sorry, you are now our American, and I am from Algeria. And there's more, Khalid added. We've got one guy from Morocco, one guy from the Gulf, one guy from Tunisia, two from Pakistan, and one from Iraq. The rest are all Afghans, but they're all from different parts of Afghanistan, and different ethnic groups as well. Jihad, Ahmed said, his smile grim and almost fearful. Holy war. This is our holy duty, to resist the Russian invaders and liberate a Muslim land. Don't get him started, Lin, Khalid winced. Ahmed's a communist. He'll be hitting you with Mao and Lenin next. Don't you feel a little compromised? I asked, tempting fate. Going up against a socialist army? What socialists? He retorted, squinting more furiously. What communists? Please do not misunderstand me. The Russians did some good things in Afghanistan. He's right about that, Khalid interrupted him. They built a lot of bridges, and all the main highways, and a lot of schools and colleges. And also dams, for fresh water, and electric power stations, all good things. And I supported them, when they did those things as a way of helping. But when they invaded Afghanistan, to change the country by force, they threw away all of the principles they are supposed to be believing. They are not true Marxists, not true Leninists. The Russians are imperialists, and I fight them in the name of Marx, Lenin, Mao. And Allah, Khalid grinned. Yes, and Allah, Ahmed agreed, smiling white teeth at us and slapping the back of the seat with his open palm. Why did they do it? I asked him. That is something that Khalid can better explain, he replied, deferring to the Palestinian veteran of several wars. Afghanistan is a prize, Khalid began. There's no major reserves of oil or gold or anything else that people might want, but still it's a big prize. The Russians want it because it's right on their border. They tried to control it the diplomatic way, with aid packages and relief programs and all that. Then they worked their own guys into power there, in a government that was really just a puppet outfit. The Americans hated it, because of the Cold War and all that brinkmanship crap, so they destabilized the place by supporting the only guys who were really pissed off with the Russian puppets, the religious mullah types. Those longbeards were out of their minds at the way the Russians were changing the country, letting women work, and go to university, and get around in public without the full burqa covering. When the Americans offered them guns and bombs and money to attack the Russians, they jumped at it. After a while, the Russians decided to cut the pretense, and they invaded the country. Now we've got a war. And Pakistan, Ahmedzadeh concluded, they want Afghanistan because they are growing very fast, too fast, and they want the land. They want to make a great country by combining the two nations. And Pakistan, because of the military generals, belongs to America. So, America helps them. They are training men now, fighters, in religion schools, madrasas, all over Pakistan. The fighters are called Talibs, and they will go into Afghanistan when the rest of us win the war. And we will win this war, Lin. But the next one, I do not know. I turned my face to the window, and as if that were a signal, the two men began to speak in Arabic. I listened to the smooth, swiftly flowing syllables and I let my thoughts drift on that sibilant music. Beyond the window the streets grew less ordered, and the buildings grew more shabby and unkempt. Many of the mud, brick and sandstone buildings were single-story dwellings, and although they were obviously inhabited by whole families they seemed unfinished, barely standing before they'd been possessed and used as shelters. We passed through whole suburbs of such haphazard and impetuously constructed sprawls, dormitory suburbs thrown up to cope with the headlong rush of immigrants from villages to the rapidly expanding city. Side streets and lateral avenues revealed that the duplication of those crude, resemblant structures extended all the way to the horizon of sight, on either side of the main road. After almost an hour of slow progress through sometimes impassably crowded streets, we stopped momentarily to allow another man to join us in the back seat. Following Khalid's instructions, the cab driver then turned his taxi around and returned along precisely the same congested route. The new man was Mahmoud Melbaf, a 30-year-old Iranian. A first glimpse of his face, the thick, black hair, the high cheekbones, the eyes colored like a sand dune in a blood-red sunset, reminded me so much of my dead friend Abdullah that I flinched around the pain of it. In a few moments the similarity dissolved. Mahmud's eyes protruded a little, his lips were less full, and his chin was pointed, as if it was designed to hold a goatee beard. It was, in fact, a very different face. But in the clear thought of Abdullah Taheri and the piercing pain of missing him, I suddenly understood a part of the reason I was there, with Khalid and the others, on a journey into someone else's war. One part, a vital part of my readiness to face the risks of taking on Kader's mission, was the guilt I still felt that Abdullah had died alone, surrounded by guns. I was putting myself in the nearest equivalent, surrounding myself with enemy guns. And in the instant of thinking that thought, in the moment of daubing the unspoken words on a gray wall of my mind, death wish, I rejected it, with a shudder that shivered across the surface of my skin. And for the first time in all the months since I'd agreed to do the job for Abdulkader Khan, the first felt afraid, and I knew that my life, there and then, was no more than a handful of sand squeezed into my clenched fist. We got out of the car a block away from the Masjid-i-Tuba Mosque. Following one another in single file, with 20 meters between each man, we reached the mosque and removed our shoes. An ancient Haji attended to the shoes while he muttered his meditational zikir. Khalid pressed a folded bank note into the man's calloused, arthritic hand. As we entered the mosque, I looked up and gasped in surprise and joy. The interior of the mosque was cool and immaculately clean. Marble and stone tiles gleamed from fluted pillars, mosaic arches, and vast stretches of patterned floors. But above and beyond all that, drawing the eye irresistibly, was the enormous white marble dome. The spectacular canopy was 100 paces across, and bejeweled with tiny, polished mirrors. As I stood there, gaping in wonder at its beauty, the electric lights in the mosque came on and the great curve of marble above us gleamed like sunshine on the million peaks and ripples of a wind-worried lake. Khalid left us immediately, promising to return as soon as possible. Ahmed, Mahmud, and I walked to an alcove that gave a view of the dome, and we sat down on the polished tile floor. It was some time since the evening prayer. I'd heard the call of the muezzin while we were driving in the cab, but there were still many men absorbed in private prayer throughout the mosque. When he was sure that I was comfortable, Ahmed announced that he would take the opportunity to pray. He excused himself and walked to the bathing fount. With his face, hands, and feet washed according to ritual, he returned to a little clear space beneath the dome and commenced his prayer. I watched him with a tiny germ of envy at the ease with which he opened his communication with God. I felt no urge to join him, but the sincerity of his meditation made me feel much more alone, somehow, in my solitary, unconnected mind. He completed the prayer and, as he began the walk back to us, Khalid returned. He wore a troubled expression. We sat close together, our heads almost touching. "We've got trouble," he whispered. "The police were at your hotel." "The cops?" "The political police," Khalid answered. "The ISI. Inter-Services Intelligence." "What did they want?" I asked. "You. All of us. We've been made. They hit Kader's house, too. You were both lucky. He was out of the house, and they didn't get him." "What have you got with you, from your hotel?" "What did you leave there?" "I've got my passports, my money, and my knife," I replied. Ahmed grinned at me. "You know, I am going to like you," he whispered. "Everything else is still there," I continued. "There's not much. Clothes, toiletries, a few books. That's it. But there's the tickets, the plane and the train tickets I bought. I left them in my carry bag. That's the only thing with a name on it, I'm pretty sure." "Nazir got your carry bag, and got out of there just a minute before the cops crashed in," Khalid said, offering me a reassuring nod. "But that's all he got time to grab. The manager's one of our guys, and he tipped Nazir off. The big question is, who told the cops that we're here? It has to be someone from Kader's side. Someone on the inside, very close. I don't like it. I don't get it, I whispered. Why are the cops so interested in us? Pakistan is supporting Afghanistan in the war. They should want us to smuggle stuff to the Mujahideen. They should be helping us to do it. They are helping some Afghans, but not all of them. The guys we're getting the stuff to, the guys near Kandahar, they're Masood's men. Pakistan hates them because they won't accept Hekmatyar, or any of the other pro-Pakistan leaders of the resistance. Pakistan and the Americans have picked out Hekmatyar as the next ruler of Afghanistan after the war. But Masood's men spit every time they hear his name. It is crazy war, Mahmoud Melbaf added in a coarse, throaty whisper. Afghans fight each other for so long time, thousands years. The only thing better than fighting each other is fighting. How do you say it, invasion? They will beat Russians, sure, but they will keep fighting. The Pakistanis want to be sure that they win the peace, after the Afghans win the war, Ahmed continued for him. No matter who wins the war for them, they want to be in control of the peace. If they could do it, they would take all of our weapons and our medicines and our other supplies, and give them to their own proxies, Khalid murmured, the New York in his accent exploding in the whispered word. Hey, you hear that? We all listened intently, and heard the sounds of singing and music from somewhere outside the mosque. They've started, Khalid said, rising to his feet with athletic grace. It's time to go. We stood and followed him out of the mosque to collect our shoes. Walking around the building in the gathering dark, we approached the sound of the singing. If I've heard this singing before, I said to Khalid as we walked. You know the blind singers? He asked. Oh sure, of course you do. You were there in Bombay, with Abdul Qadir, when they sang for us. That was the first time I ever saw you. You were there that night? Sure, we were all there. Ahmed, Mahmoud, Siddiqui, you haven't met him yet. A lot of the others who'll be going with us on this trip. They were all there that night. That was the first big meeting for this run to Afghanistan. That's why we got together. That's what the meeting was all about. Didn't you know? He laughed as he asked the question, and his tone was as honest and ingenuous as it ever was, but still the words stabbed into my mind. Didn't you know? Didn't you know? Qadir was planning the trip all that time ago, I thought, on the first night that I met him. I remembered with perfect clarity the large, smoky room where the blind singers sang for their private audience. I remembered the food that we ate, the charas we smoked. I remembered the few well-known faces I'd recognized that night. Were they all involved in the mission? I remembered the young Afghan who'd greeted Qadirbai with such respect, bending low enough to reveal the pistol held within a fold of his shawl. I was still thinking of that first night, still worried by the questions I couldn't answer, when Khalid and I came upon a large group of men, hundreds of them, sitting cross-legged on the tiles of a wide forecourt adjacent to the mosque. The blind singers finished a song and the men applauded, shouting Allah. Allah, Subhan Allah. Khalid led us through the crowd of men to a relatively sheltered alcove where Qadir sat with Nazir and several others. When I caught his eye, Qadirbai raised his hand, signaling for me to join him. As I reached his side, he grasped my hand and pulled me down beside him. A number of heads turned in our direction. Conflicting emotions stumbled into one another in my haunted heart. Fear, that I was so conspicuously associated with Qadir Khan, and a flush of pride that he'd drawn me, over all others, to sit at his side. The wheel has moved through one full turn, he whispered to me, placing his hand on my forearm and speaking close to my ear. We met each other, you and I, with the blind singers, and now we hear them again, just as we begin this important task. He was reading my mind, and I was sure, somehow, that it was deliberate, that he was fully aware of the dizzying impact of his words. I was suddenly angry with him, suddenly resentful, even of the touch of his hand on my arm. Did you arrange to have the blind singers here? I asked him, staring straight ahead and leaving the razor's edge in my tone. You know, just like you arranged everything else the first time we met? He remained silent until at last I turned to face him. When my eyes met his, I felt the sting of impulsive tears, and I mastered them by grinding my jaws together. It worked, and my burning eyes remained dry, but my mind was in turmoil. The man with the cinnamon brown skin and the trim, white beard had used and manipulated me and everyone else he knew as if we were his chained slaves. Yet there was such love in his golden eyes that it was, for me, the full measure of something I'd always craved from the innermost coils of my heart. The love in his softly smiling, deeply worried eyes was a father's love, the only father love I'd ever known. "From this moment, you stay with us," he whispered, holding my stare. "You cannot return to your hotel. The police have a description of you, and they will keep looking. This is my fault, and I must give you my apology. Someone close to us has betrayed us. It is our good luck, and his bad luck, that we were not captured. He will be punished. His mistake has revealed him to us. We know now who he is, and we know what must be done to him. But that will wait until we return from our task. Tomorrow we travel to Kedah. We must remain there for some time. When the time is right, we will make the crossing into Afghanistan. And from that day, for as long as you are in Afghanistan, there will be a price on your head. The Russians pay well for the capture of foreigners who help the Mujahideen. And we have few friends here in Pakistan. I think we will have to get some local clothes for you. We will dress you like a young man from my village, a Pashtun, like me. Yes, with a cap to cover your white hair, and a patu, a shawl, to throw over your broad shoulders and chest. We will pass you off, perhaps, as my blue-eyed son. What do you think?" What did I think? The blind singers cleared their throats noisily, and the assembly of musicians began the introduction to a new song with the plaintive wail of the harmonium and the blood-stirring passion of the tablas. I watched the long, slender fingers of the tabla players clap and caress the trembling skins of the drums, and I felt my thoughts drift away from me in the hypnotic flutter and flow of the music. My own government had put a price on my head in Australia as a reward for information leading to my capture. And there, across the world, I was putting another price on my head. Once more, as the wild grief and rapture of the blind singers rippled through a listening crowd, once more, as the eyes of that crowd blazed the ecstasy of their devotions, once more I surrendered to the fate-filled moment and felt myself, my whole life, turning with the wheel. Then I remembered the note in my pocket, the letter from Didier that Khaled had given me in the taxi 2 hours earlier. Caught up in the superstitious twist of coincidence and history repeating itself, I was suddenly desperate to know what the letter said. I slipped it from my pocket and held it close to my eyes in the yellow amber light that reached us from lamps high over our heads. Dear Lynn, this is to tell you, mon cher ami, that I have discovered who was it, the woman who betrayed you to the police and had you put inside the prison and beaten so badly. Such a terrible thing. Even now I am still desolated by it. Well then, the woman who did this thing is Madame Jo, the owner of the palace. Up to this time, I have not learned the reason for what she did, but even without some understanding of her motive for doing this terrible thing to you, I have only the best sources to assure me that it is true. I hope that I will hear from you soon. Your dear friend, Didier. Madame Jo. Why? Even as I formed the question in my mind, I knew the answer. I suddenly remembered a face staring at me with inexplicable hatred. It was the face of Rajan, Madame Jo's eunuch servant. I remembered that I'd seen him watching me, on the day of the flood, when we'd rescued Carla from the Taj Mahal Hotel in Vinod's boat. I remembered the malignant hate that had filled his eyes as he'd watched me with Carla, and watched me drive away in Shantu's taxi. Later that night the police had arrested me, and my prison torture had begun. Madame Jo had punished me for defying her, for daring to challenge her, for impersonating an American consular officer, for taking Lisa Carter away from her and, yes, perhaps for loving Carla. I tore the letter into pieces and put the fragments back in my pocket. I was calm. The fear was gone. At the end of that long Karachi day, I knew why I was going to Qatar's war, and I knew why I would return. I was going because my heart was hungry for Qadarbai's love, the father love that streamed from his eyes and filled the father-shaped hole in my life. When so many other loves were lost, my family, my friends, Prabhakar, Abdullah, even Carla, that look of love in Qatar's eyes was everything and all the world to me. It seemed stupid, it was stupid, to go to war for love. He wasn't a saint and he wasn't a hero. I knew that. He wasn't even my father. But for nothing more than those seconds of his loving gaze, I knew that I would follow him into that war, and any other. And it wasn't any more stupid than surviving just for hate and returning for revenge. For that's what it came down to. I loved him enough to risk my life, and I hated her enough to survive and to avenge myself. And I would have that revenge, I knew, if I made it through Cater's war. I would find Madame Jo, and I would kill her. I closed my mind around that thought as a man might close his hand around the hilt of a knife. The blind singers cried the joys and agonies of their love for God. Beside me, surrounding me, hearts soared in response. Cotterby turned his head to meet my eyes and nodded slowly. I smiled into the golden eyes filled with tiny, swaying lamplights and secrets and sacred pleasures summoned by the singing. And, God help me, I was content and unafraid and almost happy. Chapter 32. We spent a month in Kedah, a long month of waiting with the frustration of false starts. The delay was caused by a Mujahideen commander named Azmatullah Achakzai Muslim. He was the leader of the Achakzai people in the region of Kandahar, which was our ultimate destination. The Achakzai were a clan of sheep and goat herders who'd originally been members of the dominant Durrani clan. In 1750, the founder of modern Afghanistan, Ahmed Shah Abdali, divided the Achakzai from the Durrani and established them as a clan in their own right. That was in accordance with Afghan tradition, which allowed a sub-clan to be separated from its parent clan when it reached sufficient size or strength. It was also an admission by the wily warrior and nation-builder Ahmed Shah that the Achakzai were a force to be reckoned with and appeased. Through 2 centuries the Achakzai increased their status and their power. They earned a well-deserved reputation as fierce fighters, and every man in the clan could be counted on to follow his leader without question. During the early years of the war against the Russians, Azmatullah Achakzai Muslim formed his men into a well-armed, highly disciplined militia. In their region they became the spearhead of the independence struggle, the jihad to drive out the Soviet invaders. Toward the end of 1985, as we prepared ourselves in Kedah for the crossing into Afghanistan, Azmatullah began to vacillate in his commitment to the war. So much depended on his militia that when he pulled his men back from active service, and began secret peace talks with the Russians and their Afghan puppet government in Kabul, the entire war of resistance in the Kandahar region collapsed. Other Mujahideen units not under Azmatullah's control, such as Cater's men in the mountains north of the city, remained in their positions, but they were isolated, and every supply route to them was perilously vulnerable to Russian attack. The uncertainty forced us to wait until Azmatullah decided whether to continue the jihad or switch sides and support the Russians. No one could predict which way he would jump. Although we were all restive and agitated with the wait, as the days limped into weeks, it seemed interminable. I used the time well. I practiced phrases in Farsi, Urdu, and Pashto, and even picked up a few words in some Tajik and Uzbek dialects. I rode horses every day. While I never managed to eliminate my clownish, arm and leg flapping gestures when I made the animals stop or go or turn in a desired direction, I sometimes did succeed in dismounting them by climbing down rather than being hurled to the ground on my back. I read books every day from a bizarre, eclectic collection supplied to me by Ayub Khan, a Pakistani, and the one member of our group who'd been born in Kedah. Because it was judged too dangerous for me to leave our safe house compound at a horse ranch on the outskirts of the city, Ayub brought me books from the central library. The library was stocked with obscure and fascinating English language books that were an inheritance from the days of the British Raj. The name of the city, Kedah, was derived from the Pashto word Quetta, meaning fort. Its proximity to the Chaman Pass route to Afghanistan, and the Bolan Pass route to India, ensured Keddah's military and economic significance for millennia. The British first occupied the old fort in 1840, but were forced to abandon it after sickness in the troops and ferocious resistance from the Afghans had withered the colonial force. It was reoccupied in 1876, and firmly established as the premier British possession in that region of the northwest frontier of India. The Imperial Staff College for military officers in British India was established there, and a thriving, prosperous market center grew up in the spectacular, natural amphitheater of the surrounding mountains. A cataclysmic earthquake on the last day of May in 1935 destroyed most of the city and killed 20,000 people, but Quetta was rebuilt, and the clean, wide boulevards and pleasant weather made it one of the most popular holiday resorts in northern Pakistan. For me, restricted then to the compound, the chief attraction of the city was the random selection of books that Ayub brought to me. Every few days he appeared at my door, grinning hopefully and handing the bundle of books to me as if they were treasures from an archaeological dig. And so it was that I rode during the day, acclimatizing myself to the thinner air above 5,000 feet, and at night read the diaries and journals of long-dead explorers, extinct editions of Greek classics, eccentrically annotated volumes of Shakespeare, and a dizzyingly passionate terza rima translation of Dante's The Divine Comedy. "Some of the men think you are a scholar of the holy works," Abdul Qadir Khan said to me from the doorway of my room one night, after we'd been a month in Quetta. I closed the book that I was reading and stood to greet him at once. He took my hand and enclosed it within both of his own, muttering a whispered prayer of blessing. When he accepted the chair that I offered him, I sat down on a stool an arm's reach away. He had a parcel wrapped in cream chamois leather under his arm. He placed it on my bed and settled back comfortably. "Reading is still something mysterious, in the country of my birth, and the cause of some fear and much superstition," Qadir said wearily, rubbing a hand over his tired, brown face. "Only 4 men in 10 can read at all, and half that number again for women." "Where did you learn everything you've learned?" I asked him. "Where did you learn to speak English so well, for example?" "I was tutored by a very fine English gentleman," he laughed softly, brightening with the recollection. "Just as my little Tariq was tutored by you." I took 2 beedies from a pack, lit them in my hand with the play of a match, and handed one to him. "My father was the leader of his clan," Qadir continued. "He was a stern man, but he was also a just man and a wise man. In Afghanistan, men become leaders by merit. They're good speakers, wise managers of money, and brave when fighting is necessary. There is no inherited right to be a leader, and a leader's son who has no wisdom or courage or skill at speaking to the people will be passed over for another man with better skills. My father was very anxious for me to succeed him and to continue his life work, which was to raise his people from ignorance, and to ensure their future well-being. A wandering Sufi mystic, an old saint who visited our area when I was born, had told my father that I would grow up to become a shining star in the history of my people. My father hoped for this with all his heart, but, unfortunately, I showed none of a leader's skills, and no interest in attaining them. I was, in short, a bitter disappointment to him. He sent me to my uncle, here in Quetta. And my uncle, who was a prosperous merchant then, put me in the care of an Englishman, who became my tutor." "How old were you?" "I was 10 years old when I left Kandahar, and I spent 5 years as a student of Mr. Ian Donald Mackenzie, Esquire." "You must have been a good student," I suggested. "Perhaps," he mused in reply. "I think, really, that Mackenzie Esquire was a very good teacher. I have heard, in the years since I left him, that the people of Scotland are known for their sour and stern ways. Some people have told me that the people of Scotland are pessimists, who prefer to walk on the dark side of every sunny street. I think that if this is in some way true, it does not also tell us that the people of Scotland find this dark side of things to be very, very funny." My Mackenzie Esquire was a man who laughed in his eyes, even when he was most stern with me. Every time that I think of him, I remember the laughter in his eyes. And he loved it in Quetta. He loved the mountains and the cold air in winter. His thick, strong legs were built for climbing mountain paths, and he roamed these hills every week, often with me alone for company. He was a happy man who knew how to laugh, and he was a great teacher. "What happened when he finished teaching you?" I asked. "Did you return to Kandahar?" "I did, but it was not the joyful return that my father hoped for. You see, on the day after my dear Mackenzie Esquire left Quetta, I killed a man, in the bazaar, outside my uncle's warehouse." "When you were 15? "Yes. When I was 15 years old I killed a man, for the first time." He lapsed into silence, and I pondered the weight and measure of that phrase, "for the first time." It was a cause that was really no cause, a trick of fate, a fight that grew out of nothing at all. The man was beating a child. It was his own child, and I should not have interfered. But it was a very cruel beating, and I could not bear to watch it. Filled with the importance of being the son of a village leader, and being the nephew of one of Keda's most prosperous merchants, I commanded the man to stop beating the child. He took offense, of course, and there was an argument. The argument became a fight. And then he was dead, stabbed in the chest with his own dagger, the dagger he had tried to use on me. It was self-defense. Yes. There were many witnesses. It was in the main street of the bazaar. My uncle, who had much influence at that time, spoke for me with all the authorities, and finally arranged for me to return to Kandahar. Unfortunately, the family of the man I had killed refused to accept a blood money payment from my uncle, and they sent 2 men to Kandahar after me. I received a warning from my uncle, and I struck first. I killed both men by shooting them with my father's old long rifle. He was silent again for a while, staring at a point on the floor between our feet. I could hear music, distant and muffled, coming from the other side of the compound. There were many rooms radiating outward from a central courtyard that was larger but less grand than that in Kader's Bombay home. From some of the nearer rooms I could hear the low, water bubble murmur of conversation and the tapping drum roll of an occasional laugh. From the room next door, Khalid Ansari's room, I heard the unmistakable click-a-ka-chuck of a Kalashnikov Alaska 74 assault rifle being cocked and cold-fired after cleaning. The blood feud that began with those killings, and with their attempt to kill me, destroyed my family and theirs, Kader said flatly, resuming his story. His expression was somber, and it seemed as if a spirit was draining invisibly from his downcast eyes as he spoke. 1 on our side, 2 on theirs. 2 on our side, 1 on theirs. My father tried many times to find a way to end the feud, but it was impossible. It was a demon that moved from man to man, and made each man mad with the love of killing. I tried to leave my home, because I was the cause of the feud, but my father refused to let me leave, and I could not oppose him. The feud went on for years, and the killing went on for years. I lost my 2 brothers, and both of my uncles, my father's brothers. When my own father was badly wounded in an attack, and unable to stop me, I told my family to spread the rumor that I had been killed. I left my family home. The blood feud ended some time after that, and peace was restored between the 2 families. But I was dead to my family, because I had sworn an oath to my mother that I would never return. The breeze through the metal-framed window that had been cool in the earlier evening was suddenly cold. I stood to close the window, and then poured a glass of water from the clay pitcher on my nightstand. Kader accepted the glass, whispered a prayer, and drank the water. He handed me the glass when he was finished. I poured water into the same glass and sat down on the stool to sip at my drink. I said nothing, afraid that, if I asked the wrong question or made the wrong comment, he would stop talking altogether and leave the room. He was calm, and he seemed to be completely relaxed, but the brilliant, laughing gleam was missing from his eyes. It was also disturbingly out of character for him to be so expansive about his own life. He'd talked to me for long hours about the Quran or the life of the Prophet Muhammad or the scientific, rational basis for his moral philosophy, but I'd never known him to tell me or anyone else so much about himself. In the lengthening silence I looked at the lean, sinewed face and I controlled even the sound of my breathing, lest it disturb him. We were both dressed in the standard Afghan costume of a long, loose shirt and wide-waisted pants. His clothes were light, faded green and mine were pale blue-white. We both wore leather sandals as house slippers. Although I was heavier and deeper in the chest than Kaderbai, we were roughly the same height and build across the shoulders. His short hair and beard were white-silver, and my short hair was white-blonde. My skin was tanned to a shade resembling his natural, almond shell brown. If it wasn't for the sky in my blue-gray eyes and the alluvial gold in his, we might have been taken for father and son. How did you get from Kandahar to the Bombay Mafia? I asked him at last, when I feared that the lengthening silence, more than my questions, might make him leave. He turned to face me. His smile was radiant. A new, gentle, artless smile that had never moved his face before in any conversation with me. When I ran away from my home in Kandahar, I made a journey across Pakistan and India to Bombay. Like a million others, like millions of others, I hoped to make my fortune in the city of the Hindi picture heroes. At first, I lived in a slum, like the one that I own now, near the World Trade Center. I practiced the Hindi language every day, and I learned quickly. After a while, I observed that men could make money buying tickets for popular pictures at the cinemas and then selling them for a profit when the cinemas put up the house full signs. I decided to use the little money I'd saved to buy tickets for the most popular Hindi picture in Bombay. Then I stood outside the cinema, and when the house full signs went up, I sold my tickets for a good profit. Scalping, I said. We call it ticket scalping. It's big business, black market business, at the most popular football matches in my country. Yes. And I made an excellent profit in the first week of my work. I already began to have dreams of moving to a fine apartment and wearing the best clothes, perhaps even buying a car. Then, one night, I was standing outside the cinema with my tickets when two very big men came to me, showed me their weapons. They had a sword and a meat chopper, and demanded that I go with them. Local Gundas, I laughed. Gundas, he repeated, laughing with me. For those of us who knew him as Lord Abdul Qadir Khan, the Don, the ruler of his kingdom of crime in Bombay, it was hilarious to picture him as a shame-faced 18-year-old in the custody of two street thugs. They took me to see Chota Gulab, the Little Rose. He had that name for the mark on his cheek made by a bullet that had passed through his face, breaking most of his teeth, and leaving a scar that was pinched like a rose. He was the boss of that whole area in those days, and before he had me beaten to death, as an example to others, he wanted to take a look at the impudent fellow who had trespassed on his area. He was furious. "What are you doing, selling tickets in my area?" he asked me, speaking a mix of Hindi and English. It was a poor English, but he wanted to intimidate me with it, as if he was a judge in a court of law. "Do you know how many men died, how many men I had to kill, how many good men I lost, to take control of the black market tickets at all the cinemas in this area? I was terrified, I admit it to you, and I thought that my life was but a few minutes' worth. So I threw away my caution, and I spoke boldly. Now you will have to eliminate one more nuisance, Gulabji, I told him, speaking in English that was far superior to his, because I have no other way of making money, and I have no family, and I have nothing to lose. Unless, of course, you have some decent job of work that a loyal and resourceful young man can do for you." Well, he laughed out loud, and he asked me where I learned to speak English so well, and when I told him my story, he gave me a job right away. Then he showed me his smashed teeth, opening his mouth wide to point out the gold replacements. Looking into Chota Gulab's mouth was a real honor amongst his men, and some of his closest Gundas were very jealous that I got such an intimate tour of the famous mouth on my very first meeting with him. Gulab liked me, and he became a kind of father to me in Bombay, but I had enemies around me from the first time that I shook his hand. I went to work as a soldier, fighting with my fists and with swords and cleavers and hammers to enforce Chota Gulab's rule in the area. Those were bad days, before the council system, and there was fighting every day and night. After a while, one of his men took a special dislike to me. Resentful of my close relationship with Gulabji, he found a reason to pick a fight with me. So I killed him, and when his best friend attacked me, I killed him, too. And then I killed a man for Chota Gulab. And I killed again. And again. He fell silent, staring ahead at the floor where it met the mud brick wall. After a time, he spoke. "And again," he said. He repeated the phrase into a silence that was thickening around us and seeming to press in upon my burning eyes. And again. I watched him wade through the past, his eyes blazing recollections, and then he shook himself back into the moment. "It is late. Here, I want to give you a gift." He opened the chamois leather parcel to reveal a pistol in a side holster, several magazines, a box of ammunition, and a metal box. Lifting back the lid of the metal box, he displayed a cleaning kit of oil, graphite powder, tiny files, brushes, and a new, short pull-through cord. This is a Stechkin APS pistol, he said, taking up the weapon and removing its magazine. He checked to ensure that there was no round in the firing chamber and handed the pistol to me. It is Russian. You will find plenty of ammunition on the dead Russians, if you have to fight them. It is a 9mm caliber weapon, with a magazine of 20 rounds. You can fire it as a single shot, or set it on automatic. It is not the best gun in the world, but it is reliable, and the only light weapon with more bullets in it, where we are going, is a Kalashnikov. I want you to wear it, clearly displayed at all times from now on. You eat with it, you sleep with it, and when you wash yourself, you have it within your reach. I want everyone who is with us, and everyone who sees us, to know that you have it. Do you understand? Yes, I answered, staring at the gun in my hands. I told you that there is a price on the head of every foreigner who helps the Mujahideen. I want it to be so, that someone who might think of this reward, and of claiming it with your head, will also think of the Stechkin at your side. Do you know how to clean an automatic pistol? No. Very well. I will show you how it is done. Then you must try to sleep. We leave for Afghanistan at 5, before dawn, tomorrow morning. The waiting is over. The time has come. Khaderbai showed me how to clean the Stechkin. It was more complicated than I'd imagined, and it took the best part of an hour for him to walk me through the instructions for its complete service, repair, and handling protocols. It was a thrilling hour, and men and women of violence will know what I mean when I say that I was drunk with the pleasure of it. I confess with no little shame that I enjoyed that hour with Kader, learning how to use and clean the Stechkin automatic pistol, more than the hundreds of hours that I'd spent with him while learning his philosophy. And I never felt closer to him than I did that night as we hunched over my blanket, stripping and reassembling the killing weapon. When he left me, I turned out the light and lay back on my cot, but I couldn't sleep. My mind was caffeine alert in the darkness. At first I thought about the stories Kader had told me. I moved through that different time in the city I'd come to know so well. I imagined the Khan as a young man, fit and dangerous and fighting for Chota Gulab, the gangster boss with a little rose scar on his cheek. I knew other parts of Kader's story. I'd heard them from some of the Gundas who worked for him in Bombay. They'd told me how Khaderbai had seized control of Gulab's little empire when the scarred one was assassinated outside one of his cinemas. They'd described the gang wars that had erupted across the city, and they'd talked of Kader's courage and his ruthlessness in crushing his enemies. I knew, as well, that Khaderbai was one of the founders of the council system, which had brought peace to the city by dividing territories and spoils between the surviving gangs. I wondered, as I lay in a darkness scented with the polished floor and raw linen odors of the gun and the cleaning oil, why Khaderbai was going to war. He didn't have to go. There were 100 more like me, prepared to die for him in his place. I remembered his strangely radiant smile when he'd told me about his first meeting with Chota Gulab. I recalled how quick and youthful his hands had been when he'd shown me how to clean and use the gun. And it occurred to me that he might have been with us, risking his life, simply because he was hungry for the wilder days of his youth. The thought worried me because I was sure that at least some small part of it was true. But that other motive, that he judged the time right to end his exile, and to visit his home and family, worried me more. I couldn't forget what he'd told me. The blood feud that had killed so many and driven him from his home had only ended with his promise, to his mother, never to return. After